Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavai Tejasvinavati Tamastu Mavirishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things, I'm sorry. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace. And good evening. We are reading from the Tales and Parables of Sri Ramakrishna, which include also incidences from his own life. And so it's kind of a mixture. And we're in the section on man in divine state. So we're going to start with the one called Childlike Should Be the Man of Highest Wisdom.
Once the sannyasin came to the royal court of Janaka. To her the king bowed without looking at her face. Seeing this, the sannyasini said, "How strange it is, O Janaka, that you have still so much fear of woman. When one attains to full jnana, one's nature becomes like that of a little child, and one sees no distinction between male and female."
You know, it's going to be Swami Brahmananda's birthday celebration this Sunday. And he was noted for having a very childlike nature. Of course, Sri Ramakrishna saw him as his spiritual son. The Divine Mother told him that he was going to have a spiritual son, and he recognized Swami Brahmananda as that person. And he treated, Sri Ramakrishna treated Swami Brahmananda, who was Rakhal in those days, just like his son. He would have him sit on his lap, and they would play and joke. And even later in life, when Swami Brahmananda was an elderly man, if he was around children, he could be very childlike and playful, and not something you would think the president of the order would act like that. But he was very childlike in that way. And even he loved to play jokes. He'd play jokes on some of his brother disciples and so forth. So he really illustrated this quality of the Paramahamsa being childlike in nature. And yet he also, of course, could rule a kingdom. And so he had this very regal bearing that people also felt in his presence, that he was extremely kingly, and that's why they called him Maharaj. And yet he could also, on occasions, be as playful as a child. All right, so let's look at She Behaved in a Queer Way.
A certain devout lady, who was also a devoted wife, lived in a household serving her husband and children with a loving heart, and at the same time keeping her mind fixed on the Lord. At her husband's death, as soon as the cremation was over, she broke her glass bangles and wore a pair of gold bracelets in their place. People wondered at her unnatural conduct, but she explained to them, "Hitherto, my husband's body had been fragile, like the glass bangles. But that ephemeral body is gone. He is now like one unchangeable and full in every respect. His body is no longer fragile. So I've discarded the fragile glass bangles and worn ornaments of a permanent nature.
Yes, and of course, traditional Hindu society had very strict rules about what widows were supposed to do, what they could do and what they couldn't do. So anything out of the ordinary was called into scrutiny. But this woman had a very good reason for changing her bangles, because she realized that they represented her husband in a sense, and so she changed the glass ones that were fragile for permanent ones that were gold. So the golden nature of the Atman, you could say, that had now become one with the infinite. All right, on company of the holy.
In the Puranas, we are told that when Uma, the mother of the universe, incarnated herself as the daughter of Himalaya, she blessed him with the vision of the various manifestations of the omnipresent mother. But when Girija, the king of mountains, asked her to show him the Brahman of the Vedas, Uma said, "O father, if you wish to see Brahman, you must live in the company of holy men, men who have entirely given up the world."
So here the king of the mountain, Giriraja, was shown all sorts of visions of different kinds of visions of the Divine Mother, who represented the manifest universe, manifestations of the omnipresent Mother, the divinity which exists in everything. And then he wonders if he can be shown Brahman. Well, of course, Brahman is not really something you see with your physical eyes, but you can see in the sense of knowing. But in order to know Brahman, the parable says you have to live in the company of holy men and become enlightened like that. All right, so now that we've become enlightened, we're going to read about in that divine state.
As long as there is the body, one should take care of it. But I find that the body is quite separate from the self. When a man rids himself entirely of his love for woman and gold, then he clearly perceives that the body is one thing and the self another. When the milk inside the coconuts all dried up, then the kernel becomes separate from the shell. You feel the kernel rattling inside when you shake the coconut. Or it's just a sword, or it's just like a sword in its sheath. The sword is one thing, and the sheath is another. Therefore, I cannot speak much to the Divine Mother about the illness of the body. Well, once a long time ago, I was very ill. I was sitting in the Kali temple. I felt like praying to the Divine Mother to cure my illness. I couldn't do so directly in my own name. So I said to her, "Mother, Bridoy asked me to tell you about my illness." I could not proceed any further. At once there flashed into my mind the Museum of the Asiatic Society and a human skeleton strung together with wire. I said to her, "Please tighten the wire of my body like that, so that I may go about singing your name and glories."
Yes, indeed, that's the reason to keep the body healthy. And of course, Swami Vivekananda always emphasized trying to keep the body strong and healthy in order to do spiritual practices. And of course, Sri Ramakrishna didn't need to do that. He didn't need to do spiritual practices, but he enjoyed singing the divine name and singing her glories. And he did that for the sake of the devotees, because the mood and atmosphere when he would do that would be so uplifting to everybody. And so that's why he asked for that. Of course, one of the big misconceptions is that yogis are supposed to be always healthy. That, you do, that's the kind of the downside of Hatha Yoga. Hatha yoga does give you a nice, healthy body, and that's good for spiritual practice, but it's not supposed to end there. That's just one of the limbs of the yoga to allow you to do your spiritual practice, but it's not the be-all and end-all. And indeed, many people that are highly spiritual get all sorts of illnesses. And of course, if they're gurus, it can be because they've taken on the sins of the people that they are initiating. And everyone has a certain amount of prarabdha karma, karma that's stored up that has to be worked off. Sometimes that's the sake for the others around them, so that they can have the opportunity to serve a holy person. Other times it's just working off that particular prarabdha karma, or being part of a particular drama. As we say, we're all in a divine play, and we all get different roles to play. All right, let's read about the nature of a paramahamsa.
One time I was staying at Kamarpur when Shivaram was 4 or 5 years old. One day he's trying to catch grasshoppers near the pond. The leaves were moving. To stop their rustling, he said to the leaves, "Hush, hush, I'm going to catch a grasshopper." Another day it was stormy and it rained hard, and Shivaram was with me inside the house. There were flashes of lightning. He wanted to open the door and go out. I scolded him, stopped him. Still, he peeped out now and then. When he saw the lightning, he said, "Oh, there, Uncle, they're striking matches again." The Paramahamsa is like a 5-year-old child. He sees everything filled with consciousness.
And indeed, everything is filled with consciousness, and that's the state that we're aiming for, is to be able to see that everything is actually filled with consciousness. Sri Ramakrishna once remarked that when he's in a certain high state, he sees everything like pillows filled with consciousness. And the German mystic Gustav Fechner had that experience. He saw everything be sold, he called it that way. So this is the state that we're striving for, to be able to see that. And so it's like a little child that sees consciousness everywhere in that rudimentary sense, in that childlike sense. Of course, in the early days, humans had no other way to explain the forces of nature other than to think of them as personified energies. And so in that sense, they were seeing consciousness in the various forces of nature, like the thunder and the plants and the rain and the oceans and the wind and so forth, and fire. All of these things were powers of nature that were inscrutable. So we decided to call them by names of deities and see them as personified. And of course, the benefit of that is that it's easy to see a deity as being endowed with consciousness, much easier than seeing fire or rain or thunder as being endowed with consciousness. But if you associate it with a deity, then of course it becomes easy. All right, we're in a new section now on the guru.
Well, I don't have that. Sri Ram.
Oh, I'm sorry, we have one more. Sorry, I skipped one. Sri Shankar and the butcher. Sorry about that.
Shankaracharya was a Brahmagyani, to be sure. At the beginning, he too had the feeling of differentiation. He didn't have the absolute faith that everything in the world is Brahman. One day, as he was coming out of the Ganges after his bath, he saw an untouchable, a butcher carrying a load of meat. And inadvertently, the butcher touched his body. And Shankara shouted angrily, "Hey there! How dare you touch me?" "My revered sir," said the butcher. I have not touched you, nor have you touched me. The pure self cannot be the body, nor the 5 elements, nor the 24 cosmic principles. And then Shankara came to his senses.
This is the march of society, you could say, to see more and more people as equal. Of course, in the political arena, the democratic countries gradually saw that everyone was equal. And of course, it started by limiting the powers of the monarchy and then throwing off the monarchy and then establishing governments of the people. But when you think of it, just think how slow the progress was. It's only been a little over 100 years that women were allowed to vote. It's just kind of unthinkable. And then you have the civil rights movement and all sorts of other minority groups that gradually are seen with more dignity and more power. So this is the slow way of society really recognizing the same thing, is that the divine resides in all beings. And so we have to try to realize that and practice that. And society, you know, whether it's India or the West, have these deep-rooted ideas and prejudices about people. And Shankara was, of course, raised as a Brahmin in India, and this is a deep-seated problem when you think of yourself as a high-class Brahmin and everybody else is below you. And untouchables are just that, untouchable. So he had to overcome that. So we can forgive ourselves, I guess, a little bit if we know people that haven't been able to overcome all their prejudices. But hopefully someone will come along like this butcher did for Shankara and enlighten him. All right, let's now go on to the guru.
Guru, the teacher of men, the physician with his jars of molasses. A physician prescribed medicine for a patient and said to him, "Now come another day and I'll give you directions about diet." The physician had several jars of molasses in his room that day. The patient lived very far away. He visited the physician later, and the physician said to him, "Now be careful about your food. It's not good for you to eat molasses." After the patient left, another person who was there said to the physician, "Why did you give him all the trouble of coming here again? You could very well have given him the instruction the first day." The physician replied, "There's a reason. I had several jars of molasses in my room that day. And if I'd asked the patient then to give up molasses, well, he would not have had faith in my words. He would have thought, well, he has so many jars of molasses in his room, he must eat some of it. But then molasses cannot be so bad. Now, today I've hidden the jars, and now he will have faith in my words." Renunciation of the world is needful for those whom God wants to be teachers of men. One who is an acharya should give up woman and gold. Otherwise, people will not take his advice. It's not enough for him to renounce only mentally. He should also renounce outwardly. Only then will his teaching bear fruit. Otherwise, people will think, though he asks us to give up woman and gold, that he enjoys them himself in secret.
Yeah, so the point is well taken when it comes around to the spiritual. Now, of course, for the physician with molasses, there might be some patients that are diabetic that shouldn't take molasses. But I remember as a kid, the the health food advocates would often recommend blackstrap molasses and wheat germ bread. That was sort of a slogan of the day. So sometimes molasses, compared to simply white sugar, blackstrap molasses has all sorts of healthy nutrients in it. So for some people, it might actually be good. But when it comes to the spiritual, we're talking about renunciates, and so if you expect your acharya to have renounced the woman, lust and greed, then you would expect him to have done it completely and not just doing it in show. All right, that insignia of authority.
Kamarpukur, there's a small lake called Hadharpukur. Certain people used to befoul its banks every day. And others who came there in the morning to bathe would abuse the offenders loudly. The next morning they would find the same thing. The nuisance did not stop. And the villagers finally informed the authorities about it. A constable was sent, who put up a notice on the bank which read, "Commit no nuisance." This stopped the miscreants at once. To teach others, one must have a badge of authority. Otherwise, teaching becomes a mockery. A man who is himself ignorant starts out to teach others. It's like the blind leading the blind. Instead of doing good, such teaching does harm. After the realization of God, one obtains an inner vision, and only then can one diagnose a person's spiritual malady and give instruction.
I'm sure we've all run across this kind of incident where you tell somebody they shouldn't do something, but it doesn't do any good. So you have to call a higher authority, either the police, or in the case of a school, maybe the principal has to come in, or a security guard. We even find that to be true with parking in our parking lot. Sometimes we have a parking attendant that will double park cars, and sometimes we don't. If we don't, and one of us goes out and tells people they can't do it, we usually get ignored. But if there's a parking attendant with a little jacket on with an insignia, then they usually pay attention to them. So that's their badge of authority. So the point is very well taken. All right, one cannot teach others without receiving commission from God.
There's no harm in teaching others if the preacher has a commission from the Lord. Nobody can confound a preacher who teaches people after having received the command of God. Getting a ray of light from the goddess of learning, a man becomes so powerful that before him scholars seem like earthworms. What will a man accomplish by mere lectures without the commission from God? Once a Brahmo preacher said in the course of his sermon, "Friends, how much I used to drink," and so on. Hearing this, the people began to whisper among themselves, "What's the fool saying? He used to drink?" Now, these words produced a very unfavorable effect. This shows that preaching cannot bring a good result unless it comes from a good man. A high government official from Barasal once said to me, "Sir, if you begin the work of preaching, I too shall gird my loins." I told him the story of people dirtying the bank of the Hadharpukur, and was being stopped only when a constable, armed with authority from the government, put up a notice prohibiting it. So I say a worthless man may talk his head off preaching, and yet he will produce no effect. But people will listen to him if he's armed with a badge of authority from God. One cannot teach others without the commission from God. Teacher of men must have great power. There's many in Hadapari and Calcutta. It is with them that you will have to wrestle.
I remember that Shokananda was once quoted as saying when he was lecturing in Berkeley, "Berkeley, very lucky city." What was it? Avatars on every street corner or something like that. So, yeah. So, now, of course, we're going to have Saraswati Puja next on the 14th of February, so that's coming up for next week. And when Swami Vivekananda got up to speak at the Parliament of Religions, he invoked her blessings and asked her to fall upon his lips, and boy, did they. He became the most brilliant speaker at the Parliament. And he, of course, had already had a lot of experience talking to friends and fellow monks and so forth, and debating and philosophizing and so forth. And his friends always said that he would win every argument that he would people would get into him with. But of course, speaking to a group of peers in India is quite different from speaking to several thousands of foreigners in a foreign land. Very different experience. So even the great Vivekananda at first had a bit of stage fright, you could say. But when the goddess Saraswati, as is mentioned here, if she's blessing you, everyone will listen, and they certainly did. All right, let's read about the Avadhuta and his Upagurus.
The guru is only one, but Upagurus, secondary gurus, may be many. He is an Upaguru from whom anything whatsoever is learned. It is mentioned in the Bhagavata that the great Avadhuta, a great yogi, had 24 such Upagurus. One day, as the Avadhuta was walking across a meadow, he saw a bridal procession coming toward him with loud beating of drums and great pomp. Hard by, he saw a hunter, deeply absorbed in aiming at his game, and perfectly inattentive to the noise and pomp of the procession, casting not even a passing look at it. The Avadhuta, saluting the hunter, said, "Sir, thou art my guru. When I sit in meditation, let my mind be concentrated upon the object of meditation, as yours was on your game." Now, an angler was fishing in a pond, and the Avadhuta, approaching him, said, "Brother, which way leads to such and such a place?" The float of the rod at that time was indicating that the fish was nibbling at the bait, so the man did not give any reply. It was all attention to his fishing rod. Having first hooked the fish, he turned round and said, "What is it you've been saying, sir?" The Avadhuta saluted him and said, "Sir, thou art my guru. When I sit in contemplation of the deity of my choice, let me follow your example. And before finishing my devotions, let me not attend to anything else." The kite with a fish in its beak was followed by a host of crows and other kites, which were pecking at it, trying to snatch the fish away. Whatever direction it went, its tormentors followed it, cawing till at last they made it let go the fish in vexation. But another kite instantly caught the fish and was in its turn followed by the whole lot. But the first kite was left unmolested, sat calmly on the branch of a tree. And seeing this quiet and tranquil state of the bird, the Avadhuta, saluting him, and said, "Thou art my guru, for thou hast taught me that peace of mind is possible in this world only when one has given up one's adjuncts. Otherwise, there is danger at every step." A heron was slowly walking on a marsh to catch a fish. Behind there was Fowler aiming an arrow at the heron. The bird was totally unmindful of this fact. Avadhuta, saluting the heron, said, "When I sit in meditation, let me follow your example and never turn back to see who is behind me." Now, the Avadhuta found another guru in a bee. The bee had been storing up honey with long and great labor. The man came from somewhere, broke the hive, drank up the honey. The bee was not destined to enjoy the fruit of its long labor. On seeing this, the Avadhuta saluted the bee, saying, "Lord, thou art my guru. From thee I learn what is the sure fate of accumulated riches."
You know, this is why we have parables that deal with animals, that we look at the most outstanding characteristic of a particular animal, and then the parable is supposed to illustrate how we would like to have that particular characteristic. And so these are some examples of both humans and animals that have exemplified that. And of course, you know, people that win the lottery are often like the bird with the fish in its mouth. Suddenly there's all sorts of friends that seem to want a piece of it. And so they find out that they thought they were going to be real happy winning the lottery, and then they find they're not really that happy. Sometimes on the happiness scale, the happiness goes down simply because they are pestered so much. Or the desires just increase to the point where you still feel poor because you still don't have enough, because all it did was inflate your desires to the point where you're already short again. So people tend to desire just a little bit more than they've already got. And that's the tendency we have to break through. Be content with what you've got rather than being discontent. All right, so we'll read this next parable, then we'll play a musical version of it. This is the grass-eating tiger.
Once a tigress attacked a flock of goats. She sprang on her prey. She gave birth to a cub and died. The cub grew up in the company of the goats. The goats ate grass, and cub followed their example. They bleated, and the cub bleated too. Gradually, it grew to be a big tiger. One day, another tiger attacked the same flock, and it was amazed to see the grass-eating tiger. Running after it, the wild tiger at last seized it, whereupon the grass-eating tiger began to bleat. The wild tiger dragged it to the water and said, "Look at you. Look at your face in the water. It is just like mine. Here's a little meat. Eat it." Saying this, it thrust the meat into its mouth. But the grass-eating tiger would not swallow it and began to bleat again. But gradually it got the taste for blood and came to relish the meat. Then the wild tiger said, "Now you see, there's no difference between you and me. Now come along and follow me into the forest." So there can be no fear that the Guru's grace descends on one. He will let you know who you are and what your real nature is.
Of course, it's often done instead of a goat, they put a sheep into the parable. Often because we think of sheep as being kind of sheepish, you know, kind of timid and not very courageous. And of course, Swami Vivekananda wanted people to be courageous. And so he would use this example to show people that their true nature is divine and they shouldn't feel sheepish about their own self. So we'll hear a musical version of this, and you'll hear the tigress who's not a tall well, and she's giving birth, and then this hunter comes upon her and slays her, and she gives birth to the cub. And so then the sheep find this little cub, and the mother sheep takes it in and raises it, and so it's raised as a little sheep, but the other sheep make fun of it. They say, it's this weird-looking sheep here, and it hardly can bleat. It doesn't know how to bleat very well, and it doesn't look like us. And so, typical of like people, if you run into somebody that doesn't look just like you, you think they're kind of strange. And so this was the poor little baby tiger's fate until another tiger comes along and drags it to the pond to show it its true nature. So hopefully you'll catch all the words, but you'll certainly catch the gist because you've just heard it twice. Should be playing, not hearing anything. Is this setting wrong? Oh, it's usually stays plugged in there. So. Well, we can do it the other way. I can just play it from the machine and put the mic up. Shall we do it that way? Okay. Mother sheep when they're babies. So that's the tale of the sheepish lion that Swami Vivekananda used to like to tell. Of course, he heard it from Sri Ramakrishna. It's probably a fairly common parable, so you might have heard it from other places as well. But the poor little sheep, he was not very happy as a sheep, and it turned out he wasn't, or the lion rather, he wasn't a sheep at all, and that's why he wasn't happy. He couldn't bleat properly, he wasn't getting nourished, and so he needed to know his true nature. And knowing your true nature truly does nourish you to the absolute fullest extent. So we'll close our evening with a chant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace. The ladies are hard to understand, aren't they? Yeah, the men you can understand, but the ladies, when they're singing, they're very difficult to catch the words. Can you hear them out there? These speakers do something to it too. When I listen to it on earphones, it's